Are you tired of not being part of the 9 to 5 art world? Feel like artificial intelligence has already replaced you? Wondering why you're not getting hired by art directors? Then stay tuned as we answer the question, why aren't you drowning in job interviews?
I see a lot of junior artists complaining that they're not getting job interviews, and I wanted to make this video to address that. Usually when they complain, you see a few other junior artists getting involved in the conversation, and they're saying things like, yeah, AI sucks, right? And then I look into their artwork and I see that it's no surprise that they're not getting hired, and no surprise that it's not AI. Now there is a caveat, because in 2024, while I am getting some interest from art directors, I am not working. No one is working, and the industry is dead and may or may not return. But what I'm talking about is an issue that existed before the industry crisis and will exist after it. So if you want to survive as an artist, either by waiting for the industry to recover or by becoming your own independent artist, you better insert your coin and be ready to level up. So what I'm going to talk about is something that you might call a leveling system, like a marks out of 10, and then you're going to figure out roughly where you are and then how you can get to the next level. Then I'm going to give 4 ways in which you can take your art from whatever level you're at now to the next one, and then maybe the one after that. And again, I want to address the elephant in the room, which is, is the industry screwed? I recently made a video saying, is all hope lost? Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But I think that there may be a way forward for all of us that is aside from working in the industry, aside from working in studios, and that is to become an independent artist. That's a subject for another video, and that's a video that I definitely intend to make, so stay tuned for that. But right now, let's talk about the leveling up system. So let's just look at it as a 1 to 10 kind of scale, and where we are in, let's say, 23 to 24, that's like the watershed moment when the industry broke, essentially. And before that, it was really only artists who were, let's just say, 7 out of 10 and up that were getting job interviews and landing jobs. Today, it's really only artists that are in the sort of 8 or 9 out of 10 category that are getting jobs. The problem is that a lot of people were basically, and this is what I keep seeing, and this is the problem and why I wanted to make this video, is I keep seeing people who were in the 2, 3, 4, maybe 5 out of 10 category, some of which have just picked up Blender. I mean, I'm getting direct messages from people saying, it seems like they've picked up Blender, spent about a year or 2 on it, and are saying, where's my job interview? Some of them are doing it in 2024, which is really concerning. So what you need to do is figure out where you're at on that scale and be honest with yourself. And just know that right now, in terms of job interviews, it's really only the 8s and 9s maybe that are getting those job interviews. A lot of places are just swamped. Before the crisis, like I say, it was maybe the 7s. During the boom, before the crisis, there was the boom, wasn't there? So during the boom, it was the 6s out of 10s, which I think I was a part. It's hard to sort of judge your own artwork, I suppose, but I would say that I was about a 6 out of 10 and was swept up in that sort of boom, and now that's over, and the amount of people who are available has gone through the roof, and the amount of jobs that are available have diminished into nothing. It's really only the absolute best artists, and even some of them, I would imagine. I even saw Craig Mullins putting a post out about not having work, and he did admit that some of that was his own fault for not chasing up on some jobs. So that's the key thing. You have to figure out what level you're on and be really honest. Look at other artists who are getting work, and compare yourself on a scale. And it's really painful to do that because nobody wants to admit that they're a 2 out of 10. But the thing is, you have to go from a 2 to a 3, and then from a 3 to a 4. And it's in this video that I want to explain a few of those principles. Okay, principle number 1, and that is black shadows. Black shadows is something that I see all the time in amateur artwork. People are filling all of their shadows with black as though the only light source that exists is the sun, and then there is no ambient light, bouncing light whatsoever, and it makes the piece look really amateur. Here's another example where there's plenty of like external light that should be getting in here, bouncing around and creating some nice blues, but the artist hasn't seemed to observe the outside world and noticed any bounce light, so everything here that isn't in shadow is black. I measured the values of this, and this is like a 10 value, and these are like 3s. There should be a lot more bounce light in here, so make sure and be observing, because in nature light always like bounces around. It's very rare that you see these pure blacks. That's another example where we have windows here that are just completely black and nothing's being reflected, and if an art director sees that you don't understand the principle of bounce light, they're not likely to hire you. And the reason why we I think confuse this issue is because we study from photographs. This is a typical photograph. If you go into Google and type in sunset, you will get this kind of badly exposed photograph where the photographer has brought down the exposure so much to factor in the sky and the reflections that everything else is black. And I think a lot of people study from photographs, so don't do that. Try and study either from good photographs that are well exposed, or study from real life. Go out and just notice that when you look at things that are in the shadow, they are not black. Hello, this is me from the future, and after recording this video I watched, or started to watch, this movie called Baraka, B-A-R-A-K-A. As I was watching it, I was thinking, man, this is some really great photography, and I wanted to insert it back into the video to sort of serve as an example of photography that's really nicely exposed, as opposed to the photograph that we were just looking at. Usually you do get that with sort of documentary films, nature documentary films. So I'm just going to go through and show some examples. So look at all the shadows here, they're really nicely lit, they're not black, nicely exposed. Also, a little trick, I'm viewing this, if you can view your films somehow, whether it be through Blu-ray or whatever, through VLC player, you can go to Tools, Effects and Filters, Video Effects, Essential tab, and what I did was just tweak the saturation. It was about here before. I've just put it up to there because it seems a bit like in post-production they might have desaturated it for some sort of cool filmic effect. So I just brought back the saturation, and maybe if on your version the shadows are a little dark, just brighten them up a little bit to about there or so. So this is a great example here. If you look at how the values are here, it's nicely exposed. You could probably push the contrast so that you could, because you can see the sunlight coming through here. You don't want everything to just be the same kind of light value. So there's a nice, you'd want like a nice accent here, and to maybe push that. But if you look at the values, we've got like no blacks, no blacks, no blacks. The only blacks that we have, or low values of 10, 8, 9, 10, are in these very occluded areas here, but not in the shadows themselves. This is a really nice shot here. So yeah, this is nicely exposed. So we've really, the camera here has really increased its exposure to account for the shadows. As a result, the light here is blowing out a little bit, but that's okay. I think if we pause this and we look at the detail here, if this was a cheap camera, all of this would be pure white. So this is, I think this is acceptable. The human eye would see a little bit more information, but I think this is acceptable. If you were to do a study that came out kind of like this, it'd be acceptable to blow that out a little bit. So yeah, if you can just get a hold of some documentaries on nature and things like that. They've usually got great cinematography, and it's really good to study from them, especially if you can view it through a VLC player, and then you can control in case it is underexposed or under saturated. You can tweak some of those controls. Okay, back to the main video. So let's look at other artists who have done this well. So this is a great example. Like, I don't know, how realistic is it? This is somewhat stylized. Let's go into more detail here, but look at the shadow here. It's just, I mean, there's so much ambient light that gets into this scene that, you know, everything that's in shadow here is fairly similar to what's in the light. This is another example. Now here, this has some interesting blacks in it. Some of these values here are really dark, but they're very few and far between. There's just a little touch here, and it's almost like it's the ambient occlusion part of the painting where there's just very little light getting in here, but it's only about 5% or so. Everything else that's in shadow, look here, this is a gradient shadow, so this is in the light of the sun, which is a somewhat diffused sunlight, but we can still see things, we can still see details here. And this is a really good artist in general for nice outdoor nature-y things. Look at this one again. This is in the shadow, it's not black. There's some little low values here, a little bit here. And this is a great example from one of my favorite artists, Nathan Fowkes. Here we have the light side, which is being hit by really warm sun, and it's giving these bushes a really warm yellowy golden hue. And then in the shadow side we just have cool temperatures, we have a cool green. This is the same vegetation, as it were. It's just that this is what this vegetation looks like in the shadow, this is what this vegetation looks like in the sun, and it's just different. It's a temperature change from a cool bluish green to a warm yellowish sort of green, but like pushing right into the strong yellows. And then in the shadow we can see all this detail with these tiny little areas where there's very little light getting in, and that's the difference. You can have these dark values, but only where there really is no light getting in. Everywhere else, like this, all of this light here is bouncing in, and meaning that we can see that what is in the shadow, and it's not just sort of defaulting to a zero color black. So this is a great example. Let's move on to the next principle, which is white lights and pale lights. Okay, this is something else that I see a lot of, and that is where the key light, the main sunlight, is basically just white, and everything that it hits is just white. Now this is snow, and you can see that they've done something here to put some temperature in, but again, a bit like the shadows, I don't know whether this is more of an issue for the black shadow principle, but it's got kind of both. This here is pure black. The snow here, despite it being a sunny day seemingly, is very dark as opposed to pale blue. But everything is just so like white, so it's just like basically a white and then a black with some really dark temperatures in here. The sun, some cools and some warms. It's not like 100%, but I often see this principle here where it's just basically looks like a black and white painting in a way. The same principle goes for this one that we looked at earlier, where if you remember the Nathan Fowkes painting, the leaves were more of a yellowy warm colour, and the shadows were like a cool, whereas as we mentioned before, the shadows are black, and whatever is in the light here is just almost not so much white, but it's just pale and without temperature. And the same for this here. Really, a brown tree would go more into the warms here because it's being hit by a warm sun, but instead these browns are just kind of cold. This is a little bit better. I don't have a problem with these temperatures down here, but yes, this is like a pale, too pale for the sun, too pale. And again here, this is obviously a very sort of simple sketch, but the sunlight here is just like white, and it's just everything that it hits is just leaving this white highlight. And same for this one, with again, we've got really black shadows, and the sunlight hitting these rocks is just white. The sky's blown out. I see that a lot in the sort of low levels of painting, where the sky is kind of just a white, vague mist. That's another thing that I see. This here is a great example of temperature control, where everything that is lit by the sun is really warm and saturated, as opposed to just sort of like a pale white. This is a tricky one though. This is by one of the greatest concept artists who's ever lived, called Jamie Jones. So we have a fairly pale sky and it's fairly blown out. But there's nothing but greatness in this piece. So what do we have? Well, it's very subtle is the thing. He's controlling, if you look at these clouds very closely, he's really subtly controlling the temperature here. This here is a slightly purpley blue. This is more of a slight cyan blue. And this here, within this cloud, is actually a warm colour, and the highlights are pale, but we have this interplay of warms and cools within the shadows, within the shadows of the clouds, and that in itself creates a nice colour vibration. And we are also we've got very deliberate forms within these clouds. And one of the things that I was noticing in amateur work is the sky is just blown out and vague, and everything is just white. And this is ambiently lit, so we're seeing local colours and local values here. It's not just that the sun is hitting it and it's turning white, so we're seeing little bits of warms here. And so this is like a good example of taking your typical big environment with big clouds that's got a pale light and controlling it really well. Okay, so let's summarize. Keep your shadows with some degree of information in them rather than just reducing them to black. Make them cooler. Factor in ambient bounce light in there, and in your light areas keep them a bit more saturated and with warmer temperatures. So when you're on the hue slider and you're looking at, say, this green here, if the sunlight's hitting it, push it towards the yellows, and if it's in the shadows, put the green, in this case if you're using foliage, towards the blues ever so slightly, rather than it just be black or white. Now some people use 3D, and so it will be making some of the decisions for you, but you kind of have to rig the 3D up so that it does this. Otherwise, maybe the 3D rendering engine, the way that you've got it set up, there might be not so much bounce light. So I myself often rig it so that I'm forcing bounce light, even in Unreal Engine, which has a lot of decent bounce light. I'm putting in extra spotlights where it's too black and boosting up the shadows. So even when I'm using like some high-end 3D that already does it for you, I'm still having to make it, illuminate those black areas. Okay, let's move on to the next principle, which is noise control. So noise is like a spectrum. On the bad end, you've got just a really ugly, noisy piece, and on the good end, you have a really easy to read art piece, and it is your primary, most important goal as an artist to create a piece that reads simply and easily. It really is like the top of the list of priorities that you will have as an artist, whether that be a concept artist or an illustrator. You have to make sure that when people look at your piece, that they're not going ugh like that. And what's weird is if you make a piece, you're blind to that, so other people kind of need to give you some feedback there, I guess. But slowly you should develop your own awareness to what is noisy and what isn't. This is an example of what is not noisy. This is one of the cleanest reads I've seen in a long time. We'll go back to the good examples, but for now let's look at some bad examples of noise. Okay, so as you can appreciate, this is a very chaotic piece compared to the last one that we were looking at. the strange thing is the person who did this is a senior, and actually they're a pretty good artist. So this is not typical of their quality. However, it's an extremely noisy piece. So how would you define noise? Well, it's contrast. It's areas of dark and light and dark and light, as well as contextual. So lots of things happening in all kinds of different parts of the painting, all happening at once. So like if you squint your eyes, there's like, okay, we've got this gun here, we've got this character here, which is quite dark. You know, if this was knocked back, it would help. There's a lot of detail and contrast here that really pulls the attention, even if it's subconsciously, because we really want to look at this, but our eye is going here and then it's going here, and there's contrast going on here, and there's a house here with all kinds of sort of jagged edges. There's noise even out the peripheral of the frame here. It's just a very chaotic piece, and a lot of the time we will, as concept artists, we will use a big soft brush just to knock back some of these things. And this is another piece which, if you look over here, this area here is really noisy, very dark, very light, and that's really pulling our attention down here. And it's a tricky one, because I would imagine that the artist might then say, yeah, but I want you to look here. But it is really like all over the place. It doesn't look like the noise is controlled, but then you also have noise here and noise in this texture, fine granular noise. So there's different kinds of noise. This is like a large pieces, and this is fine pieces. But overall, you've just got kind of a noise here and a noise here. We could talk about other principles which are not listed in this short form of like 4 main principles, but like you've got edges and things like that. There's all kinds of stuff. Like this here is really contrasty and is pulling our attention. But just sticking to the noise levels now, we've got like all kinds of noise going off here and here and here and here. Overall, it's a very chaotic piece, and it's not easy to look at. And then we've got this piece, which is, compared to that piece, it's a little bit more easy to look at. Now this wasn't done by a concept artist, this was done by a visual effects artist. So they're not, usually a visual effects artist is not as well trained in these principles as concept artists. So we can cut him some slack. But like this tree here is really full of noise. There's a lot of contrast going on here and here, and yet all of this space here is relatively noiseless. So your eyes are drawn into the peripheral, and there's like a colored contrast going in and out and in and out all over this. So it's really hard to read this. So that's these 3 main examples of noise, and I'm sure you appreciate it's something that you really need to look out for. If you're not aware of noise, it can just cause absolute chaos. So going into the non-noisy, clean, easy to read examples, this is by Jamar Jurabev, and these pieces here really stood out to me as being so clean. This was posted 3 years ago. I probably saw it back then and then forgot about it and then rediscovered it. This is done in 3D with paint over, I reckon. So especially, well, this is possibly photography with paint over. I think this would be 3D, and these are definitely 3D. But overall, it's just such a simple read. If we factor in that what we were talking about with keeping the black out of the shadows, keeping the temperatures nice and warm in the light, and then having a nice, even though there's grass here, it's not noisy. It's all within a similar, if you squint your eyes, it all kind of looks like one piece, and that's the kind of the noise test. If you squint your eyes, it should read as ideally 1, 2 or 3 things. Ideally 2, and if you can get away with well, if it's one, then it's probably just one solid color, like black. So you'd have to have something and then something behind it, I guess. However, if you have one solid thing and then just something simple behind it, it still reads as just one read. Kind of like this, really. If you squint your eyes there, it's just pretty much one thing. It's maybe two if you account the two values. So if you squint your eyes, you would see this value and that value, and maybe that is the third value. I would say that if the background is clear and simple enough, your brain can just tune it out, so it feels like a 1-2 read. And again, if you squint your eyes enough, you would just see this as a barn, and so it would be the most simple possible read. But we can't all get away with having scenes that are this simple, and maybe your brief is that you have to do a battle scene with like several different things going off, and that's kind of tricky to balance out, whereas something like this is fairly simple. As artists, we're always wanting to simplify the scenes when we get a brief in, and art directors tend to, or creative directors, well, it's their job to put the content in, and the content could be 10 things and you just want to do one thing. And this is the fine balance that we have to strike as concept artists and illustrators. Here is another piece, and I put this piece in because there's a lot of examples of good noise control, and I put this in because it is a busy piece, but the noise is being controlled. So everything here, you could draw this as one outline, and if you squint your eyes, you will see that this is one piece here with this included, and then maybe two, because these values are fairly close, and then the third might be the background, but it's between the 3 and 4 reads, 3 and 4 value groups mainly. But there's a lot going on, and you're not feeling like it's overwhelmed. I guess the other thing to point out is areas of rest. The area around here is really simple, and you need that. You need an area of rest, just like how this is an area of rest, and this, and this, and this. And then we have this interesting piece. I've used this piece because it is somewhat noisy, but it is being controlled in other ways. So there is a lot of fine granular detail going on here, but it is organized. So there's an equal amount of noise here, and it's the same amount of noise. It's the same type of noise. It's armor, it's brush strokes. There's a granularity to it. There's a little bit of really fine grain here, and it's all similar. So nothing stands out as this is really noisy. That's completely not. So my brain is going that way. It has an evenness to it. And also we have a strong focal point here. So everybody's looking at this area. We've got a line that we could follow through here to the focal point, and then a line here that's guiding us in. So we're not lost, and I think that's some of the problem with using noise in a bad way. Is there's noise like here, there's noise down here, then there's nothing here, and then there's noise here, and so your eye is just going everywhere. Whereas if it was, and it seems like it's out of control, it doesn't feel like it's controlled. Whereas this feels like it's being controlled, and it's not an unattractive kind of noise. And the final idea that I wanted to talk about today was, okay, let's say you say, yeah, well, I know about principles 1, 2, and 3. I don't have that much noise. I know how to light things properly, but I'm still not getting attention from art directors. And that is because your overall idea probably just kind of sucks. And I want you to ask yourself this question. Go and look at your portfolio right now and tell me how many pieces feature a temple that you downloaded from a kit and a character in the foreground in silhouette holding a stick. If the answer is more than 0, then probably your ideas are a little bit rusty, a little bit sucky. So looking at this image on here, so it's the epitome of that. Like, not just this image, this whole Tumblr is called The Adventures of a Stick Salesman. Some of you may well have heard of this, but this person basically compiled all of the pictures from the art communities that had a guy in the foreground in silhouette holding a stick, and there is an astounding amount of these. Just look at these. I'm just going to take a minute to go through these. Look at it. Just goes on and on. Even Sparth, I think. I don't know whether this is... Yeah, this is Sparth. Even Sparth's doing it. You know, not all of these. Obviously, these paintings aren't necessarily bad. But the principle is the same, you know. Just about everybody's doing the same thing. And maybe your piece looks alright, maybe it's lit okay, maybe the composition's okay, but maybe just overall the idea is just not very interesting. So you have to go that step further and say, well, you know, I can't just put a temple in the sand with a dude in the foreground, in the, you know, with a stick, and just go that step further, which involves looking at great, really great art, and you know, looking at what they're doing. And it's hard to say just do what they do, but at least think how they think and put it just a unique spin. Get sick of it, get sick of all of the stuff that you're doing that's the same. That's one of the ways in I feel like we improve the most. The way that I've improved the most is by, as I'm working on a piece, part of my brain says, oh, I'm sick of that, and I'm sick of this, and that's just been done before. And even as I'm about to use that camera angle, I'm like, no, I've done that before, it sucked, I've done it too many times, it's time to do something new. What is it that's new? Don't just recreate what everybody else is doing, because then you become this copy of a copy of a copy. So wrapping up, you've got to take whatever level it is, establish whatever level it is, and realize that you can't get interviews, you can't get noticed until you go from wherever you're at into the higher rankings out of 10. It sounds ugly to say it, but it really is. Like, you're not going to get seen until you start getting into that 6 out of 10. And that's exactly how I thought when I was trying to get into the industry. I ranked myself as a percentile. You can do that as well. You can say, oh well, I'm at a 50. But look at those top artists. Give them around about 100 when they are really at the top of their game, and just you know, grade through until you get a good idea as to what the strata is that divides up those skill levels. Figure out roughly what skill level you honestly think that you're at, and realize that until you get into those 6s, 7s, you know, you're not going to get it. See, unfortunately, what I thought when I started to get into the industry, and I think a lot of you do too, is I thought that I'll get into the industry and I'll start out at like a 1 out of 10, because I already had some graphics and art background, and then I'll work up to a 2. By the time I'm a 3, I'll probably start charging 3 out of 10 rates, and then I'll get to 4 and I'll charge 4 out of 10, and maybe, you know, by the time I'm 5, I'm getting comfortable, you know, and then maybe 5 I can start applying for a full-time job, and when I get into that full-time job, the seniors around me will train me up to a 6 and a 7, and my career will progress that way. And it doesn't work. What happens is you start off at a 1 or a 0 if you're starting from scratch, and nobody touches you until you get all the way to a 6 or 7. And like I say, in 2024, that's now like an 8 or 9. So those artists who keep cropping up on Facebook and hitting me up and saying, hey, I'm getting no job interviews, what's going on here? And they are like a 2 or 3 out of 10, and they're saying, okay, well, I'll give it 6 more months, and if I don't get a job, you know. But it takes, I would say, up to 10 years to get to that 10 out of 10. And for me, I've been doing it 10 years, and I'm still only fluctuating between the 6 and 7. And it would take serious amounts of introspection and serious amounts of intuition. I'd probably have to train with somebody to get me above those 7s, you know, because I don't even know if I could do that by myself. So it's a really tough game, and yes, I don't know what the future holds for the industry and for the hope of us even getting any kind of full-time job. But I'm going to be putting together a video at some point on what the alternative might be to just relying on the studios and just relying on client work, because what I've learned is that you need to get those 7s and 8s and 9s out of 10 to get the proper work. But if it doesn't come, there's other kinds of income that you could get with a lower bar, a lower threshold, where you can bring something else to the table. And so that's a subject for another video. But I hope you got something out of this video. Hit me up with comments. Let me know what you think. Send me your work if you want me to give it like a once over and give you some feedback. And yeah, do like and subscribe and come back for some more concept art talk. Thank you.